What's going on, everybody? Instant reaction time on a Friday morning. Josh Callaway, Tom Green, Collin Kennedy. Our long national nightmare is over. The saga has finally come to an end. Oklahoma has got their new defensive coordinator. Nate Dreiling, come on down. Utah State defensive coordinator and interim head coach, actually, for this last football season in 2024, was hired as the Arkansas State DC earlier this month. He won't be coming to Jonesboro. He's going to come to Norman instead. Our friends over at Sooner Scoop First Report, we have since confirmed at Sooners Illustrated that Nate Dreiling coming on to the defensive staff, believed to be coaching linebackers, probably going to get a co-DC title as well, we're assuming. And obviously, it looks like Brent Venables will probably be the guy calling the defense himself. We'll talk about all the angles of that as we go along here, fellas. But just start with right off the bat, just your initial gut reaction to Nate Dreiling being the guy. I mean, this has been a name that since the Jim Knowles, that whole thing kind of came to a close. The attention kind of quickly shifted to Nate, and he's going to be the guy, it would appear, stepping into that, role, that opening vacated by Zach Alley. Initial thoughts from you guys on this hire for Oklahoma?
Yeah, I mean, not really a huge surprise. Obviously, someone we spoke about even earlier this week. Yeah, I think it's an interesting name. Guy that's got a little bit of a proven track record for a younger guy, 3 years of experience calling defenses at the FBS level. Obviously, things didn't go great last year when he was kind of thrown into that inopportune spot as interim head coach at Utah State. But he's a guy that's pretty well respected in coaching circles. I believe a year ago he was on the AFCA 35 under 35 list. Linebacker by trade, was a 4-time D2 All-American at Pitt State. I believe he's their program's all-time leading tackler, too. He's up there in a couple other categories. He's coached linebackers. He's coached some safeties in his career. And importantly, he runs a defense similar to Brent's. He works out of the 4-2-5 base so that, philosophically, they're a little bit aligned there. So I think it's somebody that, Brent can bring in to help coach the linebackers and have a role in game planning this, defensive system that he's got at least some familiarity with.
I think the best way to phrase it, and there's some nuance to this, but in general, it better work. Now, here's the thing. I say there's nuance to it because I look at Nate Dreiling, and I'm going to be honest, I'm probably like a lot of fans out there. When this name came up, didn't know much about it. You poke around and you hear that a lot of people in the college game vouch for this guy. I know a lot of people that I've talked to really think highly of this individual. I've heard that some of his mentors are the likes of Mario Cristobal, Jerry Kill, Chuck Pagano. So not only is this someone who's played the game, he's now coached the game in some successful capacities, even though he's been put in tough situations. I think the reason why I say it better work is obviously when you go from publicly the pursuit of Jim Knowles to a hire like Nate Dreiling, you not only have to make sure that you're going to be able to justify this hire, and I think that Nate Dreiling definitely has a chance. I've heard him talk now, listening to some of his stuff, and he seems like a really sharp guy, and I'm excited for him to get this job. But why I say it has to work, whatever the next few months look like, with not only Nate Dreiling coming in, but Brent Venables welcoming him into the staff and then figuring out that dynamic. Let's just address the elephant in the room. We know that Zach Alley leaving for West Virginia was about him gaining further control of that side of the ball. And Brent being who he is, how involved he is on that side of the ball. I'm not necessarily worried about the hire individually because the last thing I would say, Josh, and you and I talked about this, I viewed this defensive coordinator hire as pretty inconsequential because we knew at the end of the day who was going to call the shots. But if Brent's going to call the shots and Nate Dreiling's going to come in to help him, this has to work. They have to figure out this dynamic. And if they do, I think this can end up being a really solid hire.
Yeah, obviously not flashy, right? I mean, especially when you're coming off of, like Colin said, the pursuit of Jim Knowles, the biggest defensive coordinator name in the sport, which we talked about a couple of times, would have been quite the zag from what, Brent had done previously with Ted Roof and then with Zach Alley. This is more in that vein, whereas, Brent's going to be the guy. It's going to be his defense. He's going to be calling it on Saturdays. Like you guys said, Nate, really young guy. I mean, this guy was playing college football in the early 2010s. He's only 34 years old. Also, the Kansas connections, the Kansas guy, Brent Venables, that whole tie there. Like you guys said, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to pretend to have any clue how it's going to pan out. I mean, Nate's obviously, like Tom said, a guy who's considered, an up-and-comer. He's very young, hasn't done it at this level, obviously, or anywhere close to it in the SEC. At a place like Oklahoma, he's at Utah State. He was at New Mexico State before that. Obviously, going back to his GA days at Pittsburgh State, where he played up in Kansas. It's a big jump for him. But it's not like they're going to be putting a ton on his shoulders either, right? He's going to coach linebackers. He's going to be under Brent's wing. It's not, it should be a relatively low-stress spot for him, I would think, as much as it can be stepping into this role at Oklahoma. For you guys, the decision from Brent, outside of the specifics to Nate, but just the decision for Brent to go with someone like him, a young guy that Brent's going to call it. I mean, obviously, again, when we talked about Jim Knowles, that was the total opposite. That was Brent can just give him a lot of the responsibility and Brent can become a better head coach, that CEO we talk about all the time. This is not that. Are you guys, I'm not going to say surprised. I think that's how we thought it was going to go, but that part of it, as far as, do you like that decision or just your read of that part of the equation?
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about it. It kind of like this hire is like almost the in-between a Ted Roof and a Zach Alley.
Yeah.
Like you have the youth and somewhat inexperience of the Zach Alley, but like you're not putting as much on this plate as you were with Zach because you trusted him so much and had that pre-existing relationship. Whereas Ted Roof was almost call it what it was kind of a figurehead on that defense where Brent was overseeing everything. I think that Nate Dreiling is probably going to be entrusted a little bit more, specifically with the linebacker position, and obviously have a hand in game planning along with Jay Bly and Todd Bates and the rest of that defensive staff. But look, at the end of the day, like if you're not going to land a Jim Knowles, for as far as calling a defense, who is Brent Venables going to get that is on par with that, and that's himself. Calling defenses was what got Brent Venables to where he is today. And quite frankly, when you're coaching potentially for your job this season, who do you trust more than yourself to kind of handle those duties? Now, how is that dynamic going to work for him? Like how stretched thin is he going to be just trying to balance everything? We'll see. I think that he's going to have to trust Ben Arbuckle a lot to handle things on the offensive side of the ball. And certainly they've made the investment that shows that they trust him. They're paying him $1.5 million, one of the highest paid offensive coordinators in the SEC this upcoming season. So I think, Brent was probably, burdened a little bit by the struggles of the offense last season. And I think if the offense can turn things around under Ben Arbuckle, it should make Brent's focus on the defense a little bit more palatable.
I said this when Ben Arbuckle got hired, and I was obviously pretty high on the Arbuckle hire, and I think it's applicable here for Nate Dreiling. Knowledge knows no age requirement. You don't want to evaluate a player with the logo in mind, just like you don't want to evaluate a coach with the logo in mind, because that's not fair to that individual. Nate Dreiling could be an ace hire, and that's why I look at this and I say, this could end up being a really good thing. But I think what it really boils down to is exactly what you talk about, Josh. How much are we going to see from Nate Dreiling, knowing that this is essentially Brent Venables finalizing what we already kind of knew, right? And I think to Tom's point exactly, like Brent, after the Jim Knowles saga ended, knew I can't trust anybody else to do what I want to do at a high level at a time where the stakes are incredibly high. And so I commend Brent for honestly doing what we all felt was probably the right thing and just saying, look, this is my ship. I'm either going to continue to sail with it or sink. I worry about falling back into old ways, because what has the fan base been clamoring about for what feels like 3 years now? Is Brent Venables going to ever be the CEO? Is he going to ever truly be the head coach? Or is he going to be the defensive coordinator who happens to have the head coach title?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting dynamic, because I think you looked at Ted Roof and you said, okay, this guy is basically just around to help Brent. But Ted Roof was also a tenured coach at the college level. He's seen some ball in his days, and he's coached a very high level. Zach Alley, that was another younger hire. But Zach was the one of few to come in and the type to call those plays defensively, and Brent basically say, I'm going to let him do this thing. I think that this Nate Dreiling hire can be a good one. It's just, I think, again, to what you talked about, this sets the table for Brent to be as involved as he's ever been, it feels like. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we really have to find out in 2025.
Yeah, I will say, like, just kind of this back and forth between, do I need to be CEO? Do I need to be, getting back to my roots and, knowing what I do as a play caller? Like, I've seen this firsthand before when I was covering Auburn. Like, every offseason, it felt like Gus Malzahn was kind of, pushing and pulling between handing over the keys of his offense to his offense coordinator, whether that was Rhett Lashley or Chip Lindsey or Kenny Dillingham or Chad Morris, or being like, know what? Like, I'm coaching for my job right now. I need to be more involved and hands-on. And it's a difficult balance to try to strike when you are the head coach at the end of the day. So I'm curious to see kind of how this works out for Brent. But look, I agree with Collin. Look, I think that Nate Dreiling, based on what I've read, who I've talked to, he's a very sharp guy. I know Collin rattled off some of his mentors. Andy Avalos is another one of those. He worked under him at Oregon. He's obviously now at TCU. He's who he learned the 4.25 from. Like, that's where he picked that up. So I'm curious to see just, how this really shakes out for all parties involved.
Absolutely. We'll see how it works out for Oklahoma. Obviously, from Nate's perspective, seems like a slam dunk for him. I mean, he's a younger guy, just 34. I know he's not going to have the keys to the defense like I presume he would have at Arkansas State, the job he took, 4 weeks ago, but it's still Oklahoma. I mean, that's quite a program jump for him. It seems like a no-brainer, and to learn from Brent Venables. If you're a defensive coach, that I can't imagine a better situation than that to get to learn from Brent. So for him, makes all the sense in the world. For Oklahoma, it could. It just kind of depends on how it shakes out. Any final thoughts here? I mean, this is something that's been winding on forever. It's crazy that Zach Alley left over a month ago. 34 days, 33 days, something like that. Since he left, they finally got the guy. The saga is over. Any final thoughts on all of it, the entire search, and leading us to Nate here as it's finally over?
Yeah, I imagine it would have wrapped up a lot quicker if Ohio State hadn't kept winning.
I would hope.
And Jim Knowles' season had just ended 3 weeks ago instead of a week and a half ago. But yeah, it felt like it was just a never-ending saga here.
The number one thing that I would say to Nate Dreiling, giving him advice, and he doesn't need advice from me, but I think the number one way that Nate Dreiling can come in and make an impact to this program right away is get on the recruiting trail, man, because he comes in at a time where Oklahoma just hosted Junior Day. Next up for them is the Future Freaks event in early March. That's going to be a lot of younger players who are going to be impressionable about what the program is about. Nate Dreiling's a younger guy. He's a relatable figure. And I think when you look at how much time has gapped since Zach Alley left, this opening has created a little bit of struggle on the recruiting trail. And so the last thing I would say is I don't know how Brent Venables is going to let Nate Dreiling shine in this role. I think we have that as kind of a yet to be determined thing. But for him, man, the thing I would say is just if you are a younger coach with a lot of enthusiasm and you're ready to get out on the recruiting trail, this guy can really justify his hire over the next few months specifically.
No doubt. Coverage over at Sooners Illustrated, Oklahoma.247sports.com. More to come as the ripple effects of this hire, and we kind of let the dust settle and see what other moves are to happen for Oklahoma and the coaching staff, if any. And but Oklahoma's finally got their defensive coordinator, so one less thing on the checklist for Brent Venables, Joe Leon, and Oklahoma football right now is Nate Dreiling, the new guy at Oklahoma. That's it for now. Like I said, more coverage over at Sooners Illustrated, Oklahoma.247sports.com. Back for the podcast on Monday. For Collin Kennedy, Tom Green, I'm Josh Callaway signing off for now from Sooners Illustrated.